Alrighty, so today we're talking about understanding your Form 990. I think Adam mentioned this in the chat, but if you have any questions, just go ahead and type them up in the chat as you think of them, and then we'll discuss them at the end. Or feel free to verbally say them at the end of the meeting, whatever way works best for you. So our objectives are going to be to provide a general understanding of 990s. I think the more you know, the more confident you are asking questions. And then also an understanding of how the process works at SKC. You know, you're waiting on something from us or wondering what step is next. This way you can see a little bit behind the scenes of what we're doing. All of our clients are 501c3s. So this presentation is geared towards 501c3 990 filings. So if you're ever trying to apply this presentation and you're not a 501c3 organization, just take it with a grain of salt and maybe fact check a little bit before you apply it. So let's kind of go with that general overview, big picture. What is a Form 990? It's the IRS's primary tool for gathering information, educating organizations, and promoting compliance. So not only are you giving the IRS information, but their questions are also trying to tell you, hey, this is what you should be thinking is important. This is how you should be complying with our regulations. So it's a little bit of a two-way street there, which is helpful. It's also a powerful tool to influence public perception. We want to make sure that we are not just copy pasting from our website, that we're making sure that what we're writing is compelling, is accurate, is up to date. So those are really important things to keep in mind whenever you're doing your 990. Some stakeholders look only at the 990 or look there first. So we want to grab their attention there and really give our Form 990 the attention it needs. Who files a Form 990? This slide is a little bit self-explanatory. For the most part, if you're on this call, you probably file a Form 990. A few exceptions are churches, other religious organizations, and political organizations that are outside of that section 527. So we've started talking about this, but especially if you're a board member, you may be like, 990, like, this is not my background. I am not interested in learning about this, or just want to do very skim base level stuff. Why is this important to you? Well, we're talking about that two-way street with the IRS. The IRS asks multiple questions on the 990 about, what's the board's review process for the Form 990? What do they review it, etc. So they're saying, hey, this is a part of the board's fiscal responsibility. It's a part of your job. The IRS thinks it's important, and so you should also. And you have a background that a lot of the rest of the organization doesn't have. You know where you want the organization to go, big picture. And so if you can understand the 990, you can see, is that where we're going, and how can we help this 990 lead us where we're going the way that we want it to. Let's see. So if you're a board or you're talking to your board, help them know that this is an important thing for them to learn, understand, and review. So you may wonder, which one should I file? There's, a couple different options here, and a lot of it depends on what your gross revenues are. If over the last 3 years, your gross revenues have been 50,000 or less, you can file the Form 990N, which is called a postcard. It's very small, very simple. We recommend filing that if you qualify, unless you have a particular funder will want to see the 990 easy or the full 990, which is a little unusual, but there's a few maybe like communicate with us and we'll get you the form you need. And then if you have gross receipts that are less than 200,000, but more than that 50,000, and your assets are also less than 500,000, you can file a Form 990 EZ, which is a simpler form, though definitely more information than that postcard form. Otherwise, you'll file the Form 990. That's the full form with all the information and all the bells and whistles. So when is your Form 990 due to the IRS? Most likely something you're probably already aware of, but whenever your year end is, it's due on the 15th day of the 5th month following that year end. And then it's also very easy to file a 6-month extension. So a lot of times we'll do that with our clients, especially if there's an audit or just still waiting on gathering information. That way we make sure that that Form 990 is complete and accurate. So this is kind of our bread and butter slide. If you're a board member and you're like, okay, where do I get started with this Form 990? Here's a 1-pager of on different pages of the 990, what should you look for? So this will be a nice thing to, you know, save down and have in your back pocket the next time you're looking at a 990. But just maybe to talk through a little bit more, this is talking about a Form 990, that full form. But if you do the 990 EZ, I would also pay attention because a lot of this translates to the 990 EZ. It's just a little bit simpler on the 990 EZ. So if you understand this, then it'll be even simpler for you to understand the parts that relate to the simpler EZ form. So on that first page, you've got the summary section, and this is the IRS saying, hey, this is the information that's the most important to us. That's why we're summarizing it on the first page. And then maybe a preparer note. I'll throw in a few of those as we go. If you're the person that's behind the scenes talking to your 990 preparer, giving them the information they need, or bookkeeping throughout the year, here's kind of a tip and trick for you. Executive director, unless your bylaws specifically say so. We get that question often. So usually I see a board president or a board treasurer as the signer, but if your bylaws say it can be the executive director, then we can have the executive director be the signer here. And then you'll move on to the second page, which has which has the organization mission, which is also on that first page. And you want to make sure that this organization mission may be the same as last year, but you want to make sure that it is reflecting current operation and mission and is updated if it's not the same as last year. Part 3 on that program service accomplishment area, that board mission should be the one that's approved by the board. And then that part 1 board mission can be a little bit more simplified depending on what you're going for. And so on that program service accomplishment, here is a great place for us to brag about your organization to potential funders and stakeholders. I really, encourage my clients to take the time here, do more than copy paste from the website, add in qualitative and quantitative measures of how many people did you serve, how many meals did you prepare, etc. And another behind the scenes accounting tip is throughout the year, you can cheat a little by making your QuickBooks subclasses line up with your program accomplishments for your 990. So instead of just having program, fundraising, and administrative classes, you can have subclasses under programming that are your top 3 accomplishments. So as those expenses are happening during the year, you're tagging them to which program they relate to. So that's a great option to do there. And now we're going to move into a lot of different questions on the 990, these next couple pages. The checklist of required schedules. As a board member, you're going to look for, are all these questions accurately answered? And if there's a yes, is there an attached schedule related to that yes? If not, then it's an incomplete return and we need to get that schedule attached. And then you'll move on to this part 5, page 5, which is just talking about overall compliance. Is the IRS, did you file your 1099s? Did you file your W-2s? IRS is double checking, hey, like we said, it's a two-way street of this is what you need to do to be compliant with the IRS. So it's good to review, make sure that we are being compliant in those areas that the IRS is prompting us to be compliant in. And then page 6, which is also part 6 on the full 990, is about that governance, management, disclosure. How do you run your business at a board level? This is a great place for a board member to provide insight because you're there on the board. And it's also a great place for you to review in detail and see the weaknesses that your answers may be showing about your organization. We said that two-way street, the IRS is prompting you like, hey, here's some good policies, here's some good practices to have. We should have your board reviewing your 990, different things like that. So, every year you can look at that and say, hey, next year, let's create a policy in this area so we can answer yes to that question. So that's a great way for boards to provide input and feedback there. And then part 7 is going to be your board listing. And so this will say the members on your board, and it'll also say how involved is your board. It's good to see, something more than 0 hours per week spent on your organization, even if it's only, half an hour a week. And then also checking, hey, John Smith is in our board, but also did some contract work. So he did receive a 1099, even though it wasn't board related. We want to make sure that compensation is present here, even if it's not related to his work on the board, but he was just, painting the side of a house and got compensated for it. Who knows why? And so those are some things to check on that part 7 about the board list and compensation. And so that was a lot of the qualitative side of the 990. And now we're going to move into the qualitative, the financial side of the 990. So the first thing we're going to look at is revenue. As a board member, you should familiarize yourself with the different revenue streams and be able to identify the ones reflected on the return. Make sure, if any number looks weird, ask us. We're always happy to have those conversations and explain, how things were calculated. And we get a lot of great input from our board member questions or from our executive director questions. Some of the main differences I see on the revenue side is that any in-kind services or in-kind rental facilities are not included on the 990, but they are included in QuickBooks. So that'll be a difference you see. The other big difference is any unrealized gain or loss is not going to show up on that statement of revenue, even though it will be in QuickBooks. And so then moving on to that expense side of things, I think in addition to the program service accomplishments, this is a great place for you to really wow potential funders. If I'm, a high roller and I'm thinking about giving money to your organization, I'm going to look here and say, how is that money going to be spent? If 90% of your expenses are in the administrative column, I don't really know if I want to give money just for it to be spent on back office administrative work. But if I'm looking at an organization that's got 75% in programming and then that other 25 split out between programming and fundraising, that's going to be way more exciting for me of, hey, the money I'm giving you is really going to go to the operations and the mission I care about. And obviously there's not like one set percentage it needs to be, but just a range of you want to put as much to programming as you can. So maybe a bookkeeping tip as you're working throughout the year with your bookkeeper, don't just throw everything into the administrative class. Even if it's like rent or depreciation, you can look at what percentage of the building or of the equipment is being used for programming versus administrative versus fundraising. And you can break that out during the year to those different percentages instead of just putting it all into administrative. And that'll really help a more fluid 990 preparation process and a more attractive statement of functional expense that's also more accurate for your potential funders. So that's a big tip I try to give my clients in the 990 preparation process. And then now we're moving on to the balance sheet and the net asset reconciliation. The main differences in the reconciliation of net assets are just the normal differences between 990s and QuickBooks of that unrealized gain or in-kind services or different things like that. Sometimes we see prior period adjustments because, the client put something into QuickBooks late and didn't tell us, or they did it after the 990 was filed, or the audit came in after the 990. So our best practice is to wait until after the audit to prepare our financial side of the 990. But of course, sometimes audits happen after the IRS deadline. So we still just need to prepare the 990. So just kind of communicating with your preparer if you are making changes, if you are waiting on an audit, that can help this section look a little cleaner. And from a board perspective, looking at this section, making sure it all makes sense to you and you're asking questions if you don't know where a difference came from. And then other general board review questions as you're looking at the 990 as a whole would be, are there any blanks on the return that need to be filled out? Is the information reasonable based on your understanding of the organization? Are there any transactions with an insider of the organization? And if so, are those present on the 990? And then are any relief in the back of your mind as you're looking at the entirety of the Form 990? So I think at this point, we talked about the Form 990. I know we've been on this slide for a while. We're almost done with this slide, I promise. Just to maybe say a few items about the 990 EZ, the main differences you'll see is that there's not a statement of functional expense. It's just the statement of expense, not broken out between those program admin and fundraising. And then there's less breakout of the revenue and the balance sheet in general. And there's also less questions up here in the pages 3 through 7 or 3 through 8 question area. And then let's take a moment to talk about some of the common schedules for your Form 990. Pretty much every client I have has the Schedule A, are you funded by the public? This is the public support calculation. And so the main question here is, are you funded by the public or by just one family? We want to diversify that funder base. If you're over that 33 1/3%, great, like that's where you should be. You start to get closer to that, we may reach out to you and start talking about how can we diversify your funder base, because once you get to that 10 to 33.5%, that's when you have to create a paragraph explaining like the facts and circumstances of why you're at that percentage. Currently, I think the IRS is letting you be in that range indefinitely. If you fall below 10% of public support funding, then you become a private foundation. And so we want to definitely work to diversify that funder base and just stay above the 33.5% when at all possible. Schedule B is showing your biggest donors. So I get a lot of questions over this schedule, which for the most part, it's scheduled of any donor that's more than $5,000. But sometimes you have so much revenue that we can take 2% of the contributions of the current year and just do donors above that 2% if it's more than 5,000. And so that'll be sometimes why you don't see John Smith on that list, even though he gave 5,000 during the year. And then another question I have is, let's say, we'll keep going with John Smith. He gave 5,000 in 2021, but he pledged it in 2020, and your accrual basis accounting will have put John Smith on Schedule B in 2020 whenever the revenue was earned instead of 2021 whenever it was received. And so that's another difference I'll get questions over. The last, I guess, two differences I hear on Schedule B are, John Smith gave it to us, but he gave it through the Greater Kansas City Community Foundation or whatever foundation it is. And so the check says, Greater Kansas City Community Foundation. That's who goes on Schedule B, is whoever is on the check. And then the last question I have is, hey, John Smith wanted to be anonymous. I don't want to tell you like who this anonymous donation was, because then they won't be anonymous. This schedule only goes to the IRS. It doesn't go to the public, so your donors can stay anonymous and confidentiality is upheld through this schedule. So now let's move on to Schedule G, which is about special events. I could talk probably a whole PowerPoint presentation on special events. So the biggest thing I can say here is talk to your preparer, talk to SKC before you have your special event, so we can talk to you about what you plan to do at that special event, what information we're going to need so that you can capture that as the event is happening instead of a year later trying to figure out that information. Auctions are treated differently, raffles are treated differently. There's so many different nuances. I think having a conversation before a special event is probably the best thing you can do in that situation. Now let's move on to SKC's workflow and kind of the behind the scenes. say this often, the best thing about working for SKC is you're working for a team. So you're not just with, Joe Schmo who's got his one-man shop, and once he decides he doesn't want to work anymore or he gets sick, you just got to find somebody else. You've got multiple people here at SKC who have seen your financials, who know how your 990 works and can kind of take over in a time of need. So you've got your 990 preparer who's going to be your main contact. But we also have a team of preparers. So if I'm supposed to be your preparer and then you tell me, hey, I've got a grant deadline, but I don't have time to do it all on my own, I can reach out to the rest of the team and either have them take over or have them do a few of the more difficult schedules so that we can help you meet your deadline. We also have a CPA internal reviewer who's going to review my work afterwards, or whoever your preparer is, and then sign the 990 at the end of the process. And for the most part, you probably have bookkeeping and payroll through SKC also. So if me as the 990 preparer have questions, I can reach out to your bookkeeper or your payroll processor before reaching out to you if I think they could help with those questions. And then, so that's your team. You've got multiple people on your team, but that 990 preparer is probably your main contact throughout the process. A big part of the process is us sending you a questionnaire. And I know I've got lots of questions on the questionnaire in the past, so I figured I'd do a few slides of here are the most common questions I received, and here are their answers. So these are 3 questions that I often see Support Kansas City is the answer to these questions, but we actually cannot be the answer to any of these questions because we're not an independent accounting questionnaire. And you put SKC as the answer to a question, double check on, hey, like SKC may prepare the accounting, but I, as the executive director, am the one who, has the responsibility over it from a managing standpoint still. So that's one thing to consider here. And then whenever you're calculating how many non-cash contributions you have, how many in-kind contributions you have, make sure you exclude any services or facilities from that calculation, since they're excluded from the 990 from an in-kind standpoint. Whenever you are writing the number of independent voting members on your board, this is as of the end of your fiscal year, and the list you give us is anyone who served at any point during the fiscal year. So I'll see a discrepancy in the number of people on the list versus the number you give here. So make sure that if there is a discrepancy, 1, you're not forgetting anyone, and then 2, you write down the term, the month that somebody left or somebody joined if they didn't serve for the full year on the list you send us to kind of help with some questions there if you're trying to anticipate my questions ahead of time. And then did the organization regularly and consistently monitor and enforce compliance with the conflict of interest policy? If you answer yes here, make sure that you're doing more than just having the board members sign the policy each year. The answer is no, unless you're doing more than that, maybe to make the answer easiest to understand. So those are the main questions I receive on the questionnaire, but obviously if you have more questions or, it's your first time going through a questionnaire, just reach out to us, call your preparer, email your preparer, set up a meeting. We're here to talk through it with you. Prior year's 990, no need to create it from scratch. So now we're going to move on to what does our workflow look like from start to finish at SKC? There's so many steps in the process, and I feel like there's often, oh, what about this or that, or when are we done? So I figured maybe having one slide of here are the steps can kind of help you know where we're going and where we've been and what's left. So these first 2 items I normally do in conjunction. I'll send you off the questionnaire to have you start working on that. And then I'll reach out to the bookkeeper and make sure that the year end's closed before I start pulling that financial information. And they'll reach out to you if there's more things to be done. And then also I'll reach out to you or the bookkeeper to say, hey, you know, are you going to have an audit? What's the timeline for that? We want to wait to prepare the financials until after the audit because that's the best practice. But if the audit's not going to be done before your grant deadline or your IRS deadline, we can discuss preparing without the audit. It's just has some extra risks to it as far as having to resubmit a 990 if it's before the IRS deadline. But we won't go into that here. And then we also have, you know, after I've gotten the financials are complete and the questionnaire, I can do that 990 preparation process. I don't know if I've ever done, I'm sure I have, but I will have more questions for you pretty much. The questionnaire is a good start of a lot of questions, but as you dig into the financials and dig into your client in the preparation process, I'll just come up with more questions. So expect more questions there. And then I'll send it, or your preparer will send a draft to the internal CPA reviewer, and they'll come up with more questions that we'll probably have to send your way. So there's just questions all throughout the process. And sometimes, depending on when your grant or IRS deadline is, we'll send it to you to review either in conjunction with our internal review or after our internal review. And once again, you're going to have questions. You're going to have great questions that we'll have to research and get back to you. So definitely love and value your input whenever you do review the 990. So keep that up. And then we'll receive approval from you once we've worked through those questions. And then at that point, we'll generate the signature page. And that's the point when it becomes difficult to make further changes to your 990. So make sure you do that review instead of like, oh yeah, we'll sign it and then we'll send it to the board. And if they have more questions, like let's get all the questions and fix those, and then we'll generate the signature page. And then at that point, the signature page is the last thing you do. And then we e-file it and you get a confirmation email from us. And then you are done and good to go. This entire process, as you can see, has a lot of back and forth. So I usually say it takes 2 to 3 months to complete. And so if you've got an IRS deadline coming up in the next 2 to 3 months, your preparer either should be reaching out to you, or you can reach out to any one of us at SKC and started on it. Especially we've got a lot of clients that are due at November 15th, so that we can't wait for all of them to do at the last minute, or else you just won't receive the valued interactions that we want to give you, because we've got too much on our plate if we're waiting for all of them at the last minute. That's just my plug of I'm not a procrastinator, so let's get rolling. And then of course, if you have a grant deadline or a board meeting that you want a draft of your 994, just communicate with us, and we can make sure we are working on getting you deliverables on your timeline, not just ours, because discussion and communication is the best for this process. I believe that's everything I wanted to discuss. So at this point, I'll open up to any questions we may have.